about conservation finance before walking you through the agenda, and then we can move on to the speakers. Just some very basic thoughts about conservation finance. And in essence, what is conservation finance? It's a pretty basic definition. It's really how best to provide financing to achieve conservation goals. And then how best to actually structure your conservation finance flows in order to achieve your conservation goals. And a lot of today's talk will be on that, and that really depends a lot on what your revenues and resources are, financing, and then the nature of the actual expenditures, what you actually want to spend the money on. And just let me provide you a brief example from the Global Conservation Fund itself. Our fund was established with a $100 million grant, so there was a lot of financing, and it was really meant to both establish and then expand protected areas, and then provide for perpetual financing of recurrent management costs. Now, recurrent management costs basically have a very kind of straight line profile, so they don't really fluctuate very much, so you actually have a pretty good idea as to what your management costs are going to be, more or less, over the long term, in theory, in perpetuity. So what is a good match for that sort of financing needs? And that's an endowment, because an endowment is basically where you invest your capital. You're not meant to spend your capital, you're really meant to just use the proceeds of investing that capital in financing your conservation needs. So if you have recurrent costs, which are very straight lined, and endowment revenues that are very straight lined, that's a very good match. And so that's an example of when you analyze basically your revenues and the nature of your expenditures, and you figure out the right flows. A lot of the conversation today will be on that topic, is basically how do you figure out the best type of flows for your particular project. Once you actually figure out those flows, the only other thought I want to share today is then you actually have to focus on the details. Once you actually figure out how to structure your funding, then you really need to, in essence, your goal then is to make sure that as much money goes into the project for the project purposes. And there's a lot of considerations, and that's really, I think that's a topic for a different discussion, but there's a lot of considerations involved there. So for example, making sure as much money goes into your project, you have to think about things such as taxation and how to structure your projects to make sure that every dollar you can possibly get into the conservation project gets there. And then to make sure that it's spent for its intended purpose, it's very important to make sure that the rules regarding your conservation financing are very well defined. It's just an example of how you achieve those ends. So let me just now move on to just quickly going through today's agenda. We'll start with a 30-minute presentation on comparative advantages of conservation trust funds. And I think especially the endowment portion of a conservation trust fund and a project approach. And so I'll let the speakers speak a bit more about that. And that's going to be done by, the presentation will be given by Julien Calas of FFM and Ray Victorine of WCS. We'll then move on to a 20-minute presentation of 2 case studies. The first one is from Madagascar, and Sohandra Rabinarivo of the Madagascar Biodiversity Fund will give one case study presentation. And the other one will be from a Brazilian project, and that will be Fernanda Barbosa of Funbio, which is the Brazilian Biodiversity Fund. That'll be followed by a 10-minute presentation of JEF considerations, given by Yoko Watanabe of the JEF. After that, we will have a 45-minute Q&A moderated by Ray Victorine and Julien, who will be doing the first presentation. And then we'll I'll just present some conclusions from the various discussions, and especially from the Q&A. So if I could invite, I guess, Julien, will you speak first?
Hello everyone. Hey. So I'm Julien Calas from the French Fund for the Global Environment, the French F, depends the way you spell it in English, the FFM in French. We finance biodiversity climate change projects in the world and mainly in Africa and the Mediterranean region. Ray has first, better you present yourself.
My name is Ray Victorine. I am Director of Conservation Finance at Wildlife Conservation Society. I also lead our program on with extractive industry, working with business on conservation issues.
So we made already a presentation 2 days ago. So there will be a few slides on the conservation finance to explain a bit what is it. I will try to make a mix between the short and a bit the main lines, so that we can pass on to the main subject. So conservation finance, as it says, it's really a virtual collaborative network. There is no building, no institution. It's really people who want to speak about and exchange information about sustainable financing for conservation. And to promote sustainable financing for biodiversity conservation worldwide. So it's mainly exchange of knowledge, experience between its members. It's completely an open network. Most of the members are volunteers from around the globe, and we have institutions like NGOs, governments, agencies, donors agencies, foundations, private companies, and researchers. Here you have figures. So we reach today 330 registered members based in 65 countries. As you can see, it's quite representative of what is going on in the world now. We have a good share of Northern America, which is the most experienced, perhaps, area in the world with conservation trust funds. We have a representative from Europe, Latin America and the Caribbean, Northern America and Africa, and Oceania, of course, even in Asia, even if the share is less, and perhaps we could improve that. So we are very happy to be in Korea, perhaps to find some new partners. This is the main sponsor members. So as you can see, there is a lot of different partners who are interested to contribute to several works that we try to implement together. It can be government donors, private foundations, NGOs. So we are already a multiple stakeholder network at our level. CFM members take part in different working groups, which were set up. One which is mainly on environmental funds, one which is dedicated to innovative finance mechanism, and one which is particularly dedicated to protected area financing. We have a CFA executive committee who is taking the decision, a small group of people, and we have the CFA secretariat who is really helping us a lot for the facilitation and operational support, organizing the webinars, the conference call, and this is done since the last years by Funbio in Brazil. And I would like to take the opportunity to thank again Funbio for the help. So as you can see, I told already, CFA members meet through virtual meetings, monthly conference calls, and a lot of emails. So let's jump on one particular work that we started by the way this year. But we have several others. By the way, you can go to the CFA website, and there is a lot of documentation there which are dealing with the subject. This work there is the work that we spell as comparative advantage of conservation trust fund versus project approach for protected area or protected area systems in particular. So the beginning was in a lot of countries where we are all working, when we have to discuss about the conservation finance, and particularly the endowment funds, but there is, as you know, sinking funds or revolving funds. There are different kind of funds, but we will try to speak mainly of the endowment funds. Usually when you have to deal with local authorities or donors, you have to deal with the question, why should significant amount of scarce and expensive resources, mainly grants, be committed in the capitalization of a fund with small returns, the proceeds over the long term, which is the most interesting part of it, while more immediate and visible results could be achieved with immediate and direct investment on biodiversity conservation in the form of short-term projects, traditional project that we know, several millions of US dollars spent on 4, 5, 6 years, and then that's it, that's done, you have delivered some result and you are happy with it. So we speak about this, you can explain how to make a decision between the different tools. You choose perhaps to save the capital and use the proceed only, or just spend all the capital or the project funding directly for conservation. It's true also that there's questions about conservation finance, conservation fund, conservation trust funds was part of the broader debate at the international level about risk with innovative financing mechanism for biodiversity, and we thought that could help, this kind of work could help to clarify what are really conservation trust funds now at the time where we speak. Yeah. So the precise objective that we gave to a consulting team was to compare the advantages and disadvantages of the financing through either a long-term CTF mechanism versus the traditional project approach to support protected area system, and to put in evidence the conditions that determine the decision for the both investment options. The focus of the study, because of the funding available for that, was decided to be in Africa, Latin America and Caribbean region. So the basic of the question was also to say that in most countries where we are speaking of Africa and Latin America, PA financing presents an important gap. All the needs are not met in most of the countries. We are still all struggling to try to leverage additional financing for the objective of conservation, and particularly at least to provide a sustainable, sustainable resources for the protected area systems. But you could also have the same vision for either the civil society, because there is conservation trust fund only dedicated to provide funding for organizations, NGOs who are working towards the conservation of the natural heritage of a country, and you could ask the same question. We decided to try to focus this study really on funds who are working mainly towards the sustainability of protected area systems. And probably we could extend the question on different other way of objectives. So you have this example of Belize, just recently released by UNDP work, which give an idea what we are speaking about. So the country invested in 2010 almost $9 million US, while according to the evaluation of the needs for a basic scenario, this country needs at least 18.5 million US dollar to try to reach to tackle all the goals for conservation in this country. So we have a funding gap of almost 9.6 million for the basic scenario, and with an ideal scenario where you try to finance almost everything which is needed, then you will reach a funding gap of almost 20 million US dollars. So facing that kind of big gap, where do you find the money to do that, and what mechanism you choose to try to finance this? You want to comment this? Okay, you go to the table. I continue. So this is to also to illustrate what we are speaking about. This is purely an illustration, that it's not a real case. And this is to show that from the right, from the stage of the creation, when you have several efforts in assessment, creation, you are in a phase of identification of the needs for conservation and the establishment of a protected area, then you start to reach a phase of investment, then you create the protected area, then you need to invest in all the infrastructure, putting the equipment, the staff in places, and train the people, and develop all the programs linked with the protected area. Then later, after all these efforts, you enter in a phase of consolidation of all the efforts, and then perhaps if everything goes well, then you enter in a phase of mature development. And we try to identify different classes of costs, but you could also have a different breakdown. But let's say you could have in green all the different administrative costs. You have the certain class of costs linked to all you are doing with the community, either within or around the protected area, or the questions about how you manage the sustainable use of natural resources linked with the protected area, either tourism within the protected area or with, again, the riparian communities, and all, the conservation and research efforts linked with the protected area. Again, so we are speaking about how you finance this, knowing that within the time frame and the cycle of life of a protected area, the demand varies also, and how you adapt to that. So it's clear that the first step in this process is to really insist on the fact that usually before to ask all this question, you need to really invest in trying to identify what are the needs and the gaps, which is not always the case. Still today, you find places where you have protected area with a good management plan, but very few information about all the detailed costs and all the vision of the cost over the long term. And this is really the steps that you need to take before to really go to this question about, according to the needs and the gaps, what kind of tools I will use. Then, when you start to have that kind of level of information, then you can start to identify which mechanism or tools, a project, a conservation trust funds, you will try to design and implement to try to reach the goals. Again, let's be clear, we could add to these questions payment for ecosystem services or carbon finance or any other tools. We decided for the moment to really try to put the question about these two very specific mechanisms. Okay, then this is just to illustrate what we are speaking about. In a lot of countries where we are working, you have the demand, you have an assessment of the needs, but usually what you face, that was the case of Belize. Belize is far better than that, but let's say what we show is that the current source of financing, particularly from the protected area themselves or from the public budget, are absolutely not at the level of the demand. And there is a big gap in the financing needs. Then what we know is that usually we are able, with a lot of donors funding the conservation effort in the world, we are able to provide projects. And project, what is it? It's, there's foreign development assistance, means you have a project for 5-6 years, big amount of money over a short term of period, and usually you are not necessarily filling all the gaps. And particularly when you look at the long term. And what we are speaking now is to see, is there a way to mix the different approaches to try again to fill the gap. And again, this is to illustrate this with an effort made by a country trying to finance with the allocation available the basic funding needs, mobilizing the international effort through foreign development assistance to put some project to support the protected area, and then after the idea is that after 5 years there is a fund which is coming in and starting to provide a flow of financing, an additional flow of financing to try to fill the gap. And it's fair enough to show here that even though you still may not fill all the gaps. This is what this graph is is showing, and we need to be clear, you know, all this mechanism will not necessarily save all the problems. We are just trying to find a way to be the most effective. So the study went through a lot of collection of documents. They did quite some, you know, bibliographic analysis. We went through a web survey with more than, I think, I didn't provide the flag to the study, but I think it's more than 75 participants, which were either project manager, UNDP officials. We had protected area managers, we had conservation trust fund managers, we had several officials from ministries of different countries, even donors who try to answer the question about what makes sense, you know, what are the advantages and disadvantages of the different mechanisms. So here we go to the table.
Thank you, Julian. So this study, and actually later on